The government's climate bill hits the upper house this week. It's to reduce overall emissions by 43%. It's set to get support, but even some of those supporting it are saying it doesn't end the so-called climate wars in Australia. Joining me now is Greens Environment spokesperson Senator Sarah Hanson-Young. Thanks very much for your time.
Good morning.
Is that how you'd sum up where you're at on this? You'll support it, but you're going to, essentially keep agitating?
Well, what we need now is the action to drive the pollution down and to go further than the 43%, but we need action on the table to make sure we start cutting pollution and tackling climate change. The bill that will pass this week is pretty symbolic, important but symbolic. Now we need the action, which is why we need a climate trigger in our environment laws. We need to stop funding fossil fuel companies through subsidies, and we need to stop allowing new coal and gas projects to be opened. There's no, you can't.
You'll have a bill on that, but it won't get support, will it? It won't pass the
Well,
Parliament.
we are introducing the climate trigger bill today in the Senate, and this is an important example of what needs to happen. The government has said that their environment laws, they know, are not strong enough, that they're being reviewed. Well, this is one of the key elements that needs to be.
Why not
in the
wait
mix.
for the review, though?
Well, this is important to make sure we all can see where we have to go. I've spent a lot of time.
This is a review on the very thing you're already seeking a bill to change.
The government's review into environment laws are going to be very broad.
Yeah.
What I've done today is outlined one of the key things they need to do. We've put in the effort as to what a climate trigger would look like, and seek to talk to the government about it.
So a committee last week, the Greens' position within that committee was increase our target to 73%. That's what would that cost?
Well, Tom, it's more about what it's going to cost if we don't start dealing with climate change and reducing carbon pollution. We've seen the bushfires, we've seen the floods, we're seeing food security issues. We know that we have to start taking this seriously. Transitioning our economy, we either put in place a plan to do it, or we are forced there and people get left behind.
There's widespread agreement that we need to act and that not acting costs, yes. But don't we also need to know what 73% might cost, acting in haste like that?
It's not in haste. We already know that the planet is warming. We know that the climate has changed. It's already here. We've got to be taking this action. The bill that's currently before the chamber today, the Senate, is the first real indication that climate change requires us to reduce pollution. What we're saying is that we should be taking the advice of the scientists, and that is a reduction far greater than 43% if we are to stop dangerous global warming. The whole point of this is we get to a tipping point where if we don't cut pollution fast enough, it's almost impossible to stop runaway climate change.
So if people are going to vote for that, for example, in the next election, shouldn't they still have some idea what 73% by 2030 would cost? I understand long-term stuff.
But what do you mean by cost, Tom?
Well, for example, let's just take one element, the energy grid. Now, when you talk about the final output, sort of a new coal plant versus solar, yes, solar's arguably cheaper now and getting cheaper, but transitioning the grid is really expensive. It's going to cost billions, tens of billions,
yes,
maybe more. So it's just talking about what that cost might be. The faster we go, the more we'll get a bill for it the next year.
Well, this is why we need the government now to be sending a signal to all of the departments that to meet these goals, it has to be cross-governmental. The budget is going to have to consider what the cost of transition is, but also one of the best ways of paying for that transition would be to stop the billions of dollars going to subsidise fossil fuel companies and fossil fuel industry.
This sort of transition though alone.
Well, at the moment we are spending tens of billions of dollars subsidising an industry that is making climate change worse, that is making the job of everybody harder to deal with.
But if you're talking about the advice...
Public money going to fossil fuel companies.
If you're talking about, say, advice from a climate change authority on here's how we could act, shouldn't that also include the cost? So if you go to 43%, it'll cost this, 50% this, 60% this, and then it could also...
Sure. I think we do need to consider the costs of these things, and alongside that, we need to consider the cost that it's already taken on not reducing pollution fast enough. The billions of dollars that we've had to spend cleaning up after the bushfires, cleaning up after the floods, the billions of dollars our country will lose as the rest of the world transition and we get left behind.
And because once you know that, you can find out, well, who should pay? How do you do it? Is there a tax you'd advocate for? Is it going to go onto government debt? And is that sustainable? That's the other part about needing to know the cost. How is it affordable and how do we pay for it?
And one of the key things we should do is stop spending billions and billions of dollars on fossil fuel
Well, you've
subsidies.
made that point, so that's a proposal you'd have. But my point is, once we know what the cost is, you know how you pay for it. So I understand what you're saying, there's a cost of not acting, but you still need to know what something will cost because a government or a taxpayer or someone has to pay for it.
Sure, but at this point, what we've got is billions of dollars being spent making climate change worse. That is crazy. We need to stop opening up new coal and gas. We need a climate trigger in our environment laws so that our environmental assessment is not being given a green light to a project that is going to damage the environment even more and make carbon pollution, greenhouse gases worse.
Okay.
And let's stop wasting public money on an industry that around the entire world is being told it has to transition.
Cost of living, welfare payments are going to increase. What did you make of this move today?
Well, that was, an indication, of course, of just how low some of these payments are. For job seekers out there, it's still well below the poverty line. It's less than $2 extra a day, and it's not good enough. We saw during the pandemic that we can afford to pay people the right amount so that they can pay for food on the table and a roof over their head and
when
still
you say
look
can afford, we were going into record debt. Nothing was affordable about what we did during the pandemic.
So let's scrap the stage 3 tax cuts and make sure that the people who are doing it the hardest in this country are given a little bit extra of
That's another way to do it, but there was
support.
nothing affordable about the spending overall during the pandemic.
Well, the thing is that if you actually help people, if you want to help people into jobs, if you want to help people who are living well below the poverty line, you actually have to increase the job seeker payment. We're going to keep pushing for that.
Got to leave it there. Senator, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Tom.